70,000 feet. At this altitude, the sky isn't blue, it's black. The air pressure is 3% of sea level. Your blood will boil if your suit fails. Fly 2 knots too slow, and your engine flames out. Fly 2 knots too fast, and your wings rip apart. Pilots call this the Coffin corner. On May 1, 1960, a 30-year-old pilot from Kentucky was sitting in that Coffin corner 1,300 miles inside Soviet territory. His name was Francis Gary Powers. He was supposed to be untouchable, flying higher than any Soviet missile could reach, photographing secrets the Kremlin would kill to protect. He was wrong. What happened next collapsed a superpower summit, humiliated a president, and brought the world closer to nuclear war than any bomb ever built. Not because of what the plane carried, because of what it couldn't destroy. Welcome to Shadow Works. Today we open the file on the U-2 Dragon Lady. In 1953, America had a problem it couldn't admit. The most powerful nation on Earth was flying blind. 4 years earlier, the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb. The CIA had predicted it would take them another decade. They were wrong by half. Behind the Iron Curtain, Stalin's successors were building something. Bombers, missiles, maybe weapons that could reach American cities in under an hour. The problem? No one knew for certain. In 1955, American observers watched a Soviet air show. 30 Myasishchev M4 bombers codenamed Bison thundered over Red Square. The Air Force panicked. They projected 600 Soviet intercontinental bombers by 1960. Congress demanded billions for new B-52s. Press called it the bomber gap. There was just one problem. Those 30 bombers? They flew in a circle, past the reviewing stand multiple times. The entire Soviet heavy bomber fleet was a magic trick. But America didn't know that. Not yet. President Eisenhower understood the danger of ignorance. In war, he'd commanded the largest invasion in human history. He knew that bad intelligence killed soldiers. Bad intelligence about nuclear weapons could kill everyone. On July 21, 1955, Eisenhower made a radical proposal at the Geneva summit. Open skies. Both superpowers would exchange maps of their military bases. Both would allow unarmed reconnaissance flights. Total transparency. No more guessing. No more fear. Khrushchev rejected it immediately. He called it nothing more than an espionage plot. The Soviets couldn't afford transparency. They were bluffing, and they knew it. Letting Americans see their actual capabilities would expose the lie. Eisenhower expected the rejection. Some historians believe he wanted it. Now the Soviets looked like the obstacle to peace. And now he had justification for what came next. If the Soviets wouldn't open their skies voluntarily, America would open them anyway. Enter Kelly Johnson. Clarence Leonard Johnson. The greatest aircraft designer America ever produced. Creator of the P-38 Lightning. The F-104 Starfighter. The man his colleagues said could see air. Johnson had an idea that the Air Force had already rejected. Build a jet-powered glider. Strip away everything armor, weapons, redundant systems. Make it so light, so efficient, that it could cruise above 70,000 feet. Higher than any Soviet fighter. Higher than any anti-aircraft gun. Higher than physics said an airplane should fly. The Air Force said it was too fragile. Too unconventional. They wanted the Bell X-16 instead of proper military aircraft. But the CIA wasn't the Air Force. Director Allen Dulles saw potential. So did Edwin Land, the man who invented the Polaroid camera. Land took the idea directly to Eisenhower. In November 1954, the president approved the project. Budget, $22.5 million. Deadline, impossible. Code name, Aquatone. Kelly Johnson had 8 months to build an airplane that broke every rule of aviation. His team worked around the clock. First payment? A check for $1.26 million mailed directly to Johnson's home. They needed somewhere to test it, somewhere no one would ask questions. In April 1955, Johnson and C.I. officer Richard Beasel flew over the Nevada desert. They spotted a dry lakebed near the Atomic Energy Commission's nuclear test site. Johnson called it Paradise Ranch. Everyone else would call it Area 51. On August 1, 1955, 8 months after the contract was signed, test pilot Tony Liva climbed into the cockpit for a high-speed taxi test. He wasn't planning to fly. At 70 knots, those impossibly long wings caught the air. The plane leaped off the ground. Liva later said, "I had no intentions whatsoever of flying, but the U-2 had other ideas." Within weeks, it reached 74,500 feet, higher than any aircraft in history. The project came in $3.5 million under budget. Now came the hard part. The U-2 wasn't just an airplane. It was a contradiction. Wingspan, 80 feet longer than a B-29 bomber. Weight, just 17,000 pounds fully loaded. Glide ratio, 23:1. For every foot it dropped, it traveled 23 feet forward. It flew like a sailplane, which meant it landed like a nightmare. No conventional landing gear. Just two wheels in a line, like a bicycle. Removable pogo wheels under the wings fell away at takeoff. Every landing required a chase car, another pilot screaming instructions over the radio, because the U-2 pilot couldn't see the ground. And then there was the suit. At 70,000 feet, atmospheric pressure drops to almost nothing. Without protection, a pilot's blood would literally boil. The moisture in their lungs would vaporize. Every U-2 pilot wore a custom-fitted pressure suit, ancestor of the spacesuits that would later go to the moon. Before every flight, they breathed pure oxygen for 1 hour, purging nitrogen from their blood, preventing the bends. And then there was the Coffin corner. At 70,000 feet, the margin between too slow and too fast shrinks to as little as 5 knots. Fly too slow, the engine flames out. You fall into Soviet airspace at a very inconvenient altitude. Fly too fast, shock waves form on the wings. The aircraft tears itself apart. Even a gentle turn was dangerous. The outer wing moves faster than the inner wing. One could be overspeeding while the other was stalling. The Air Force's official designation, the most difficult aircraft in the world to fly. But none of that mattered if the cameras didn't work. The Heiken 7.3B camera weighed nearly 1,000 pounds. Its 36-inch lens was designed by a Harvard astronomer and built by Perkin-Elmer. Resolution from 70,000 feet, 2.5 feet. Good enough to count bombers. Good enough to identify missile types. Not quite good enough to read a newspaper headline, despite what the legends say. On July 4, 1956, American Independence Day, the first operational mission launched from Wiesbaden, West Germany. The target, Leningrad and Moscow. The pilot crossed into Soviet airspace while Ambassador Charles Bolin was hosting a July 4th reception in Moscow. Khrushchev himself was raising a toast to President Eisenhower. The Soviets detected the flight immediately. MiG fighters scrambled. They couldn't reach him. The U-2 was cruising 20,000 feet above their maximum ceiling. The pilots could see the contrails of Soviet interceptors, desperate, furious, helpless. Khrushchev knew, but he couldn't admit it publicly. Acknowledging the overflights would reveal that Soviet air defenses were useless. Instead, the Soviets delivered a private protest, calling the flights deliberate provocation. The Americans ignored it, because the intelligence was too valuable. Remember the bomber gap? The 600 Soviet intercontinental bombers that terrified Congress? One U-2 mission photographed all 30 Bison bombers at a single airfield. The entire Soviet fleet. There was no bomber gap. There never had been. By 1958, 90% of all hard intelligence about the Soviet Union came from one source, the U-2. But the Soviets were learning. In 1957, they deployed a new weapon, the S-75 Dina. NATO called it the SA-2 guideline. Maximum engagement altitude, 82,000 feet. The safety margin was shrinking. For 3 years, the U-2 pilots kept flying, kept photographing, kept pushing their luck. By May 1960, Francis Gary Powers was the most experienced U-2 pilot in the program. 27 missions, 500 flight hours. He'd never been touched. On April 28th, he received orders for the most ambitious mission yet. Operation Grand Slam. 3,800 miles. 2,900 of them over Soviet territory. The first attempt to fly completely across the USSR. Targets: Baikonur Cosmodrome, the Mayak Plutonium Facility, Sverdlovsk, Plesetsk. The date: May 1, 1960, May Day, the most important Soviet holiday of the year. No one considered what that might mean. 6:26 a.m., May 1, 1960. Francis Gary Powers lifted off from Peshawar, Pakistan. Ahead of him, 9 hours of flight, 4 hours over Soviet territory. The most heavily defended airspace on Earth. He crossed into Soviet airspace over Afghanistan, climbed to 70,500 feet. Soviet air defenses detected him immediately. Fighters scrambled from bases across Central Asia. None could reach him. For 4 hours, Powers flew north. Baikonur, Chelyabinsk, each target photographed, each secret captured. Then he approached Sverdlovsk. On the ground below, Major Mikhail Voronov's missile battalion was waiting. The SA-2 guideline, maximum altitude, 82,000 feet. Powers was at 70,500, well within range. At 8:53 a.m. local time, Vorov's battery fired. Powers later described it, a dull thump. The aircraft jerked forward. A tremendous orange flash lit the cockpit and the sky. The missile didn't hit the aircraft directly. It didn't have to. The proximity-fused warhead detonated close enough to shred the U-2's tail. The aircraft entered an inverted spin, nose pointing up, tail pointing down, falling. Powers tried to reach the self-destruct switch. It was behind his seat. The G-forces pinned him against the instrument panel. He thought about ejecting, but the U-2's ejection seat fired upward through the canopy. In the current spin, his legs were extended into the ejection path. If he pulled the handle, the seat would sever both legs 3 inches above the knee. At 34,000 feet, he released the canopy manually. The wind caught him, threw him forward against the windscreen. His oxygen hoses, still connected, were the only thing holding him in the aircraft. He kicked. Again. The hoses broke. He fell free. His chute opened automatically at 15,000 feet. As he drifted down, he could see the wreckage of his aircraft scattered across miles of Soviet farmland. Around his neck, he wore a silver dollar. Inside was a tiny needle coated with saxitoxin, a shellfish poison. 1 scratch would kill in seconds. He'd been told it was optional, for situations with no hope of survival. He tucked it away. He landed near a collective farm. Within minutes, villagers surrounded him. One man walked up carrying a reel of film recovered from the wreckage. Francis Gary Powers was now a prisoner of the Soviet Union, but the Americans didn't know that. On May 3rd, NASA issued a press release. A weather research plane had gone missing over Turkey. The pilot had reported oxygen difficulties. To support the story, a U-2 was quickly painted with NASA markings and displayed to reporters. The cover story was solid. The plane was destroyed. The pilot was certainly dead. No one could survive a shoot-down at 70,000 feet. On May 5th, Khrushchev stood before the Supreme Soviet. He announced that Soviet air defenses had shot down an American spy plane. He did not mention the pilot. The State Department doubled down. This was an unarmed weather plane. Any deviation into Soviet airspace was accidental, caused by oxygen equipment failure, Khrushchev was waiting for exactly this. On May 7th, he sprung the trap. I must tell you a secret. When I made my first report, I deliberately did not say that the pilot was alive and well. And now just look how many silly things the Americans have said. He produced Powers, the wreckage, the cameras, the photographs, everything. The cover story wasn't just wrong. It was demolished. On May 11th, Eisenhower did something no American president had ever done. He publicly admitted authorizing espionage. No one wants another Pearl Harbor. This means we must have knowledge of military forces and preparations around the world, especially those capable of massive surprise attack. 5 days later, the Paris summit convened. Eisenhower, Khrushchev, Macmillan, de Gaulle. They were supposed to discuss Berlin, disarmament, the future of Europe. Instead, Khrushchev demanded an apology, a promise to punish those responsible, a guarantee the flights would never resume. Eisenhower agreed to stop the flights. He refused to apologize. Khrushchev walked out. The summit collapsed. The spirit of Camp David, the warming of relations from the previous year, evaporated. U.S.-Soviet relations reached their lowest point since Stalin. All because of one pilot, one plane, one photograph that proved America was watching. Francis Gary Powers was tried in Moscow on August 17, 1960, his 31st birthday. Sentence, 10 years. He was sent to Vladimir Prison, 150 miles east of Moscow. He chose to share a cell rather than face solitary confinement. He learned to weave carpets, studied Russian, read Tolstoy in the original language. He waited. On February 10, 1962, at 8:52 a.m., 2 men walked toward each other on the Glienicke Bridge. Francis Gary Powers. Coming from the east, Colonel Rudolph Abel, Soviet master spy, convicted of espionage in New York. Coming from the west, they passed at the center of the bridge. Barely a glance between them. The exchange was complete. But America's reception was cold. Critics demanded to know, why didn't he use the poison needle? Why didn't he activate the self-destruct? Why did he talk? Some newspapers called him a traitor. On March 6, 1962, Powers testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee. He explained the ejection seat problem, the G-forces, the impossible choice between certain death and possible survival. The committee cleared him of all wrongdoing. The public wasn't so forgiving. Powers worked as a test pilot, wrote a memoir, lost his job because of it. Eventually, he became a helicopter traffic reporter in Los Angeles. On August 1, 1977, 17 years to the day after the U-2's first flight, his helicopter ran out of fuel over the San Fernando Valley. Below him, a group of teenagers playing baseball. Witnesses say he made a sudden maneuver to avoid them. The helicopter crashed. Francis Gary Powers was dead at 47. The NTSB found 5 ounces of fuel in the tank. A mechanic had repaired a faulty gauge without telling Powers. He thought he had 30 minutes of flight time left. He had none. For decades, his legacy remained clouded. The pilot who got caught, the spy who lived. Then, on June 15, 2012, the Air Force awarded Francis Gary Powers the Silver Star. The citation praised his exceptional loyalty under impossible circumstances. 52 years after his plane fell from the sky, America finally said what the Senate had concluded in 1962. He did his duty. The U-2 was supposed to be temporary, a stopgap until satellites could do the job. The first successful spy satellite flew in 1960. The same year, Powers was shot down. Within years, America had eyes everywhere, no pilot risk, no diplomatic incidents. The U-2 should have been retired. Instead, it found a new mission. October 14, 1962, a U-2 photographed Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba. The Cuban Missile Crisis had begun. 13 days later, Major Rudolf Anderson was flying reconnaissance over Cuba when an SA-2 found its mark. He became the only combat fatality of the crisis, the first recipient of the Air Force Cross. His death shocked both leaders. It reminded them how close they were to losing control. Some historians believe Anderson's sacrifice helped end the crisis. The U-2 kept evolving. The U-2R in 1967, 40% larger, longer range, better sensors. The U-2S in 1994, new engine, 30% more efficient. Today's Dragon Lady carries 3 times the sensors of the original, flies twice as far, stays up 3 times as long. It outlasted the SR-71 Blackbird, retired 1998. It's outlasting the Global Hawk drone, currently being retired. Why? The U-2 flies higher, carries more, operates in weather that grounds drones. And unlike satellites, its arrival is unpredictable. The Coffin corner is still there. The pressure suits are still necessary. The landings still require chase cars. Today, 27 U-2S operate from Beale Air Force Base, California. At any given moment, day or night, a U-2 is flying an operational mission somewhere in the world. Somewhere in the world, right now, a Dragon Lady pilot is sitting in the Coffin corner, watching. In 2023, when a Chinese surveillance balloon drifted across America, it was a U-2 that got close enough to photograph its payload. 70 years after Kelly Johnson's impossible airplane first lifted off from a Nevada lakebed, the Dragon Lady is still flying, still watching, still untouchable. The U-2 was built on a contradiction, an airplane designed to be invisible that caused the biggest diplomatic crisis of the Cold War, a machine meant to prevent surprise that delivered, the biggest surprise of all. When Francis Gary Powers fell from the sky, he took more than a spy plane with him. He took the illusion that espionage could remain secret, that superpowers could cheat without consequences. He spent decades under suspicion. The pilot who lived when he should have died. But the Senate was right in 1962. He made an impossible choice and chose to survive. The Dragon Lady made no such choice. It was designed to fly for a few years. It's been flying for 70. The Air Force has tried to retire it 4 times. Congress keeps saying no. Because some machines refuse to die. Some missions never end. And some secrets are still worth keeping. The U-2 flew where Soviet fighters couldn't reach. But what if the Soviets built a fighter that could reach anywhere? The Sukhoi Su-47 Burkett. Wings that bent the wrong way. Maneuverability that broke the laws of physics. It was supposed to revolutionize air combat. It flew twice then disappeared. Click here to find out why.